Hey, it's Keith Townsend, principal of the CTO advisor, and I have with me Sarbjeet Johal. Sarbjeet, what's your official title, man?
I am technology strategist.
So, if you haven't noticed, me and Sarbjeet get in back and forth a lot of time in conversations. I'm an old school IT infrastructure guy. I like data centers. I like cables. I like wires. But Sarbjeet really came up with a great topic that we're going to discuss on this CTO advisor road trip stop. And check notes, we're in Los Altos, California at Lincoln Park. Pretty nice park.
Yeah, it's the beautiful part of the Bay Area, Los Altos. Yep, you can tell, right?
Yeah, it's there's fancy shopping right across the street. It's really nice area.
Yep.
So, Sarbjeet, we're talking about the new stack and defining what is the new stack, and then two, what are the roles and who's been kind of left behind in the new stack. So, define for us, what is the new stack?
So I think the new stack is all up in the air right now, like overall. But if you back up a little bit, stacks change all the time. And I usually cite this one talk where our CTO back then from Rackspace, John and Gates did for Splunk at their annual conference. Was like the title of the talk was "Stack What Stack." Means like there's no stack. Mm-hmm. We're multi-stack right now, right? So what that does is it takes us away from, we used to have the blue stack, red stack, you're Oracle or you're the IBM or Microsoft, right? But now it's all over the place, right? We talk about
I was going to install the Linux subsystem on Windows 10 the other day. You're talking about stack. Is that the Microsoft stack? Is the Ubuntu stack? What is the stack?
Everybody's doing everything.
Right.
You notice that? Like everybody's doing everything at all levels, even within our world, which is infrastructure, platform as a service, and then SaaS world. Almost everybody's doing everything. Like look at Salesforce, look at Workday. They're trying to go, you can say down the stack, if you will, like from SaaS to PaaS, both these companies. And Oracle is struggling there a little bit at the same time. HP was purely infrastructure service, and they're trying to go into the PaaS layer now, right? With interjection of Kubernetes and other sort of
their Esmeralda and Lighthouse. We just did a video with Chris Eitler, who leads their Lighthouse initiative, and then I'm thinking, wow, this sounds a lot like the OpenStack days, what you guys did with OpenStack, but now with this new stack. But okay, so
so actually we were talking off camera before we started like rolling the camera. A lot of roles have been impacted. Traditionally we had traditional development and traditional operations and security, and we used to have NOCs and DBAs. Remember those DBAs?
Yeah, DBAs. There's still data. Data's the most valuable asset, but there's no database administrators anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So like you never hear the word DBA these days, the term DBA, but we talk about data all the time. So what happened to DBAs? What are they doing these days? What have they become? So it's law is moving. So that we are doing microservices. We are not doing monolithic software. We're not doing this in-memory calls to the other sort of set of functions within an application. We're going over the wire, doing REST APIs. So it throws a lot of things, the traditional thinking, into sort of this basket, like your trash now, and then there's a new way of building software, the Lego sort of blocks, and I think it's a beautiful thing. We wanted to get here, but the problem is like now we need to make it work.
So there's two parts of that. There's when you're talking about the new stack and the DBA's role in the new stack. I'd like to delve into like functionally who's doing the DBA's job. But when I go to customer sites, they still very much have a DBA group. Yeah, that DBA group just isn't doing new stack applications.
Yeah.
So the old stuff is still there. There's still teams performing that DBA functional work for SAP, for the Oracle databases, etc. But for a cloud native application that's running off of some NoSQL database or something that developers really don't care. They're just making a call from an API and getting the data sets. Who's maintaining and taking care of the data, and how should the current DBA think about moving from being a DBA to being that new thing?
Yeah. So with the advent of DevOps, right, the whole idea was the developers are doing operations as well. If you think about DBAs, they were in the middle. Developers were writing code.
Right.
The DBAs kept you honest. Like as a developer, I used to define the schemas, the database schemas, and then we'll pass it to DBA, and they'll say like, oh no, this foreign key is not right. Like this is not normalized, or do we need to denormalize it for performance? And they knew that performance on the database side, so they kind of fixed the problems so that it performs in operations. So they were close to operations. But today, we are trying to make developers do everything. Developers are defining these schemas, and they are persisting. They are actually operations as well. That's what Amazon calls two pizza teams. So this one team is responsible for development and operations and everything in between, like release and all that stuff.
So I see that executed in varying degrees.
Yeah.
Some companies have gone all in the concept of DevOps. Other companies, you know what, they've created a development group, then they've created an operations group full of developers. So there's a range of it. But if we're going to stick to kind of the extreme range of, developers doing both development and operations, and you're a DBA today, and you're looking at, I need to work for another 20 years, what should you be looking to do?
Yeah, I always say that the DBAs and the traditional network engineers, they need to learn how to code, so they can start using. So network engineers will do infrastructure as code, and here on this side, the DBAs will do NoSQL and I seriously think that the future of data democratization and data sort of interfaces is APIs. I seriously think that way. Because if you think about NoSQL code and how that data gets persisted from it, like atomic function, into some database somewhere, right? Do you care where that data is sitting, as long as you can get to it and it's persisted and it's also, it has shelf life. Whatever you define the shelf life.
Just as long as my data is consistent, recoverable. I have ability to do version controls, integrity, etc. Just as long as those things exist,
behind the scenes,
behind the scenes, I don't care if there's literally 8 people going back and doing the checks.
Yeah.
Just as long as I'm getting the API and the SLAs I need, then I don't care about the back end.
Yeah, and then this whole discussion actually from another lens, like what we usually call it, like isolation. Like how much isolated you are from the end application or the use case. Like you talk about the resource isolation in the cloud context. We usually talk about like, okay, you're using shared infrastructure, right? And then you may not use the shared infrastructure. Some companies don't allow that because of the regulations and all that stuff. So that you get dedicated servers even in the cloud, right? So then next is the shared, and next is, after that, it's a shared physical, and then the next is shared logical. Means like you're sharing the libraries as code as well, or the pass layer as well. And then the next thing is like you're sharing. If you think about serverless, right? You're sharing Amazon's sort of code libraries. Everybody's using that. So somehow there's a lot that the sharing level goes higher, if you will. So I think depending on your appetite for risk appetite towards the regulations, if you will, like how much you are willing to bend the rules, if not break them, people are going more towards more like shared models, like more sharing. So that means like I don't care. That means what I'm trying to say is like in this context, I don't care where the data is sitting. It can be sitting in this sort of data mart versus that, as long as I can get to it. But there will be a problem after a while for us, for the industry, I think, which I think we need to go into.
If you're a DBA here, there's a bifurcation that you either go deep and help the likes of Amazon, Google, Oracle, the Microsoft, the cloud providers, the providers of the data, solve those hard consistency and availability and recoverability type problems. Or you go to the consumer side and you talk about how that data is put to use closer to the developer, that there isn't going to be, in your opinion, long term, this middle layer, the DBA that kind of negotiates between the two. It's either the cloud provider is going to give you the guardrails that developers need to do the development that they need without care about impacting performance, because the APIs are the guardrails, and the system has the guardrails to prevent you doing bad stuff.
Yeah, I think that's one way it can evolve. Yes, like how many top DBAs can hyperscalers hire? Not many, right? There are so many out there. So what will they do? I think some of them will be still doing traditional DBA work. The legacy will stay. It stays a little longer than what you think.
Right.
People are still doing COBOL right now. I mean, COBOL programmers are actually very expensive these days. I think at some point the traditional DBAs will be expensive as well. Right now they are kind of suffering, but at some point they will be like, okay, people will do less and less. It's demand and supply. But I think some DBAs in the middle, they will morph into more like they will learn the newer database technologies, NoSQL, the API-based persistence, if you will. There's a lot of I don't have any doubt about that there will be new way of persistence in next 5 to 10 years. I can't tell you what they are going to be. Like, we didn't think about NoSQL 10 years back. Like, gradually it came into the picture and caught on. So, and another thing is there's a polyglottism in the database world, right? So there's most of the decent size applications, not the lower end of the applications, they use relational databases as well as the NoSQL.
Yes, they do.
Time.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's this kind of the best. We talk about it in multi-cloud, but it exists in the database world for a little bit now, of using the right platform for the right thing. If I need a timescale type of solution or a real-time system, etc., I'm using the right data source for the application.
Yeah.
So, Sarbjeet, if people want to find out more about your kind of musings, or even our back and forths, because we had some great back and forths. I think it's great because I come at it from a infrastructure perspective. You have great history from a vendor and application perspective. Where can people find out more about your views and kind of your services?
I mostly traverse on Twitter. Actually, I do my brain dump there. I spill my gut there, I usually call it. So that's where you can find me, and LinkedIn.
All right, Sarbjeet, thanks a lot for joining the conversation. We are going to have, I'm sure, great conversations about multi-cloud, workload repatriation, when will the data center die, if ever. To follow those conversations, you can follow me on the web at CTO Advisor on Twitter, and Sarbjeet on Twitter as well. And he will gladly tag you in some of our long and drawn out conversations and debates. Talk to you next CTO Dose.